Well, the purpose of this video is to help the Vegetation Committee for the PFC refine their objectives for the Middle Fork Weiser River Restoration Project. And part of the need to do that is based on the review of the draft recommendations at the April meeting. The data that was incorporated in the draft recommendations has been revised based on the ID team's field verification. And so one of the purposes of this video is to highlight some of the summary data and its impact on objectives for the Middle Fork. Just a quick overview of the project boundary. This is a 50,000 acre NEPA planning area. Over on the east side, you can see the Tamarack ski area. There are yellow dots here that are the locations from our very rainy June 2013 field trip. The one in the south central portion of the area was the stop the Grays Creek fire. The two at the northern end were just about the high elevation point for the project area, and viewing south from that point over the Granite Creek watershed. Now, as we look from the high altitude overview, it's a little bit difficult to answer the question of what needs to be restored. But as background, the recommendations include the Forest Service definition of restoration. Here is it's just captured on this slide, and the restoration is defined as the process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that's been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. So as we look at that 50,000 acre area, how do we best evaluate to what extent the area has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed? And then restoration treatments focus on reestablishing the composition, structure, the pattern across the landscape, and reestablishing ecological processes. And I think interesting to note in the definition is that the purpose extends beyond considering current conditions, but also anticipating future conditions when the coalition considers the long-term sustainability, resilience, and health of the terrestrial systems. So another way to look at objectives, or to phrase objectives, is what's the scale of restoration activity? How much of it should be done? And for the coalition, that question is answered in the context of 5 goals addressing wildlife, wildfire, watershed health, forest access and recreation, and restoration economics. So the objectives, the recommended objectives will offer to the Forest Service the coalition's priorities on how much to restore within the context of those 5 goals. So the approach that the committee has implemented is to compare the desired condition to the current condition. The desired comes from the Forest Plan, Appendix A, as modified by the Draft Wildlife Conservation Strategy. The desired condition relies on a study that quantified the natural range of variation by potential vegetation groups, and is really used as a baseline reference of resilient conditions. The current condition, the part that has been revised based on the field data, was derived from the Strata database, and this, combined with potential vegetation groups, considers tree size, class, and canopy closure as major attributes to consider in evaluating the extent to which the project area has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. Species composition is also a factor to consider, as well as the pattern of the stand conditions across the landscape. We're going to use these charts to summarize the revised data, starting with potential vegetation groups 1, 2, and 5. Note that the colors represent the PVGs. 1 is blue, PVG 2 is in red, and PVG 5 is green. As we go from the bottom to the top of the chart, the size class increases from grasses, forbs, shrubs, and seedlings to the large tree size class at the top. The units on the x-axis are acres. As the columns extend to the right, that means the current condition is overrepresented compared to historical conditions. If the columns extend to the left, as they do for the large tree size class for each of these PVGs, it means that that tree size class is underrepresented in the landscape compared to historical conditions. So what this chart is telling us is the conditions in the Middle Fork are consistent with those across the Payette National Forest in general, and that is for these three PVGs, the large tree size class is underrepresented. The medium tree size class, however, is overrepresented, and a small sapling and grasses, forbs, shrubs, and seedlings have some departure, but not to the extent of the medium and large tree size classes. So given this distribution, I think that helped the committee determine that there are two priorities that are important. One is, given the shortfall in the large tree size class, the coalition would like to retain or enhance the existing acres that fall into that size class category where possible. And with the abundance of the medium size class, the second priority is to accelerate the progression of that size class into the large tree size class. So for retaining or enhancing the large tree size class, another attribute was considered, and that is the desired canopy closure and the departure of the current condition from the desired. And this format of this chart is similar, only now we're looking at canopy closure class going from low to high, low at the bottom, high at the top. And as the columns extend to the right, it's telling you the acres of departure. And when the columns extend to the right, it means that there's an abundance of acres in that canopy closure category. But when the columns extend to the left, as they do for the low canopy closure class, it means that the departure is an underrepresentation. So for the departure for PVG 1 is minimal, but for 2 and 5, you can see that compared to historical conditions, that the large tree size class stands that have a high canopy closure are overrepresented, as are the moderate canopy closure class, and the low is underrepresented. So an interpretation of this is that appropriate treatments to consider are those that would decrease the stand density, decrease the canopy closure in both the high and moderate categories for PVGs 2 and 5, essentially graphically shifting the acres that are departed from desired conditions towards zero, and in the case of the low canopy closure class, shifting the acres departure from desired condition to the right towards zero, increasing the amount of acres in that canopy closure class. Now, with the second priority, the acres in the medium tree size class, we want to accelerate their progression towards the large. You can see that there's significant acres for PVG2, it's over 1,000 acres. PVG5, it's about 750 acres. How many acres should be treated? Well, I think there's sufficient acres within the project area in this medium tree size class that if they were treated, if the acres that are showing as being abundant were treated, it would come close to accelerating the acres to the point where it would make up for the shortfall in the large tree size class. For a PVG2, it would take a couple hundred acres more than what's shown here, but as a general rule of thumb, I think that could be considered an objective, a quantifiable objective for treating the medium tree size class stands. The conditions for 6, 7, and 10 are a little bit different, and the appropriate treatments that have been discussed, particularly for 7 and 10, are also different than for PVGs 1, 2, and 5. 6 is kind of an unusual one, as we saw in Lost Creek, Boulder Creek, and discussed. PVG 6 really contains two different moisture conditions, two different fire regimes. So the thought is that a portion of the roughly 2,500 acres in the large tree size class probably contains or includes early cereal species, and that portion of PVG 6 that does include early cereal species could be appropriate stand conditions for thinning, similar to what has been discussed for PVGs 1, 2, and 5. However, the moisture conditions for PVG 6 probably align more closely with what is appropriate for 7 and 10, PVGs 7 and 10. The chart is showing a significant amount of acres in the large tree size class, over 3,000 acres in PVG 7, over 500 acres in PVG 10. And notice the shortfall in the other size classes. So I think as the committee has struggled with what to do with PVG 7 and 10, there is some agreement that there is an ecological basis for doing some treatment. These conditions have departed from historical conditions. It probably does not represent the most resilient stand conditions, nor does it create a diversified network of habitat across the 50,000 acres within those PVGs. But I guess the tough question to answer is, well, how much treatment should there be? And perhaps one guide for that is in terms of creating patches to break up the blocks of PVGs 7 and perhaps 10, is to consider the shortfall in the grasses, forbs, shrubs, and seedlings, and use that as a way to set a maximum amount. So perhaps something less than 500 acres for PVG 7 should be created through treatment within this category, and for PVG 10 that would be something less than 40 acres. So in summary, given the revised data, this summary table has 3 columns: the committee's priority, their recommended priority, the PVG involved, and a suggested objective in terms of acres. I think the retain enhanced large tree size class for 1, 2, and 5 is pretty clear, and roughly 840 acres that have in the large tree size class that currently exists has departed from historical conditions and would benefit from treatment. Those are also acres that are likely to produce stumpage receipts that could be used elsewhere. In PVG 6, those acres that have early cereals are candidates for the same or similar type of treatment. I don't know what the acres are, but perhaps the ID team could help provide some background information on that. I'm guessing that it could be as much as 1,000 acres in the large tree size class that would be appropriate and have early cereals present and could be treated. For the second priority, accelerating the progression of medium to large tree size class stands in PVGs 1, 2, and 5. I think the shortfall in those PVGs in the large tree size class is approaching 2,200 acres, so I'm suggesting that that would be an appropriate objective to treat that many acres to at least approach the midpoint of the desired condition in the large tree size class for those 3 PVGs. Next priority was accelerating the progression of small tree size class plantations to medium and large tree size class stands. The recommendation was to do this across all PVGs, with the emphasis on those that had early cereals as part of the species composition or as the dominant species composition. Now, I don't know what the appropriate acres are here, because when you look at particularly PVGs 6, 7, and 10, there's not only a shortfall in the small tree size class, but also in the saplings. So I think there's some consideration that, or some discussion that needs to continue on that topic to determine what an appropriate objective is for that type of treatment. And then as discussed with altering the patch size and distribution in PVG 7 and 10, perhaps using the shortfall of the acres in the grasses, forbs, shrubs, seedlings as a guide to determine a maximum amount that should be created by treatment of patch size cuts within those PVG 7 and 10. So I think going from top to bottom, probably the clearest objective is the one at the very top, with retaining and enhancing the large tree size class as we progress through to the small tree size class stands that are plantations, and also the patch size or the patch type cuts for PVG 7 and 10. The objective, the quantifiable objective, is less clear. So where are these treatment priorities? Here is a map showing an overview for the project area with the 6th order watersheds, or the 6th level watersheds shown: Granite Creek at the top, Jungle Creek next, Mica Creek, and Little Fall Creek at the southern end. The color code here is the brown are the priority ones, the retain and enhance the large tree size class stands in the appropriate PVGs. Yellow is accelerating the medium to the large tree size class. In green, I'm showing all of the PVG 6 large tree size class stands. So needs to be some additional breakdown, or at least a recommendation to focus on only that portion that has early several species present. And then PVG 7 is in this kind of rose color. And the idea there would be to increase the number of patches, or the distribution of patches, and break up the larger blocks of that PVG. So this is just a zoomed in version for the Granite Creek watershed. You can get a little bit better idea of the distribution of the priority 1 in brown. Yellow would be the next priority of accelerating the medium to large. All PVG 6s in the large tree size class shown in the green, and then the PVG 7 in the rose color. Moving on to Jungle Creek, this gap in the middle is the private ownership, and also the fault line here, the edge of the earth, for the Forest Service ownership for the PVG 6 large tree size class category. That gives you, again, an idea of the distribution of the spatial distribution of these recommended priorities. Mica Creek had the Grays Creek fire in a portion of it, so there shifts a lot of the priorities to other portions of the watershed. Again, and then finally, Little Fall Creek, and a portion of the watershed is outside of the project boundary due to the private ownership. That is an overview of the results of the updated strata file from the field verification, and hope this helps the Vegetation Committee finalize their recommendations, and also helps the PFC consider those recommendations at the next meeting.